why would the state want to own a cannabis dispensary? Like, it's not in the actual state, the governmental bodies in these states, they're not in the business of being in business. They're in the business of governing. Like, is this to ensure regulatory oversight, or is this because they're getting greedy and they want to have their hand in the cookie jar and they see cannabis as a lucrative enterprise?
Hey everyone, welcome to our latest TDR Cannabis exclusive. Yes, we keep talking about rescheduling, but when that announcement does happen, what happens to the banking system? We've all heard of some horror stories as to what this banking system currently looks like for the industry, but how does that change? And there's no other better person to bring in than the Chief Strategic Business Development Officer from Safe Harbor, which trades on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol SHFS. Tyler Beuerlein, good to see you, sir. It's been a couple of months since we saw you in Vegas. How are things?
Things are great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. You guys doing all right?
Yeah, we're not doing bad. Yeah. Is that the outside? Is that a green screen, or is that just how nice it is in Arizona right now?
It's how nice it is in Arizona. It's 80 degrees today. It's a beautiful day.
What'd you make of MJ Biz? Was there a lot of dialogue with relates to the whole banking system? I know we got a chance to do a podcast at Planet 13, but in a nutshell, like, I'm sure rescheduling was a hot topic while you were there, but there's obviously a lot of misconceptions related to it. And I do want to get into some examples, especially what's going on in Wisconsin right now. But how are things changing and developing based on conversations you're having, if indeed rescheduling is announced later, let's say, hopefully in April, May?
So let me start by saying, look, the whole notion that there's a banking crisis in the industry, I mean, that ship has sailed, right? There's not an operator in this country that can't easily find a bank account. We bank the industry nationwide. So for someone to say, hey, I can't find a bank account, that's just, not accurate. Now, I would say that on top of that, because so many institutions have gotten into the space, there's been a ton of price compression. It's gotten very competitive, and that benefits the industry.
Yeah.
Where rescheduling would impact the banking side is lending. And the reason for that is because from an underwriting standpoint right now, with 280E, it makes it very difficult to find operators that fit into a credit box that we can fund. Yeah. Right. So if 280E goes away, you're talking about in some cases maybe a 30-40% margin on cash flow that appears right almost out of thin air. And from a banking standpoint and a lending standpoint, that helps us immensely.
So lending, you think many people are speculating and thinking that lending will open up floodgates, when rescheduling happens. Is that accurate?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's encouraging.
Now it's still coming from a limited number of institutions that have a limited number or a limited access to capital to lend.
Yeah.
But I think you'll see that environment get much more competitive, and that it will only expand to the industry's benefit.
One of the themes I know that we spoke about in Las Vegas were seeing a drawdown in debit card transactions and seeing some of the payment processors kind of clamp down. Have you seen any progress as it relates to that, or anything kind of alleviated in that situation?
Yeah. So if you're talking about debit led back to two banks in the country, one in the Southeast, one in the upper Midwest, that decided to run after the debit space, thinking that may be a long-term solution for the industry. Didn't work out well for either, as we know, and there were massive shutdowns nationwide. What we're starting to see, which I would caution anybody in the industry to 100% stay away from, anything involving a credit card for a transaction in cannabis is prohibited. Yeah. No question asked. And we've seen a couple of institutions actually try to open what I call holding accounts, run the transaction as a financial institution service transaction, put it into a holding account that's then ACH to the merchant.
Yeah.
That is also a non-starter from the network standpoint.
Yeah.
They view that as almost even being worse. And so we've seen parties try to do that. Hasn't gone well. Now they're pivoting. They're still in the market. That's something that is very concerning to me, because anytime funds are going into a holding account like that, they can be seized. And we've seen that in the past on a pretty grand scale. And I've seen operators miss out on, 7 figures plus of monies on deposit because those funds were seized in that scenario. So, ACH is still permissible.
Yeah.
We're seeing cashless ATMs trickle back in, which, could be a challenge. long term, because again, those are prohibited as well. But credit cards are really the one that give me heartburn, because at the end of the day, that's a fraudulent transaction, unquestioned, and so I'm afraid we're going to see some more fallout from that.
When we see more states about to go live, like I look at the state of Wisconsin, and they're focusing hard on obviously bringing the legal medical cannabis industry to market. You've openly said, like, if we continue down this road, we're going down a slippery slope when it comes to, like, tax accounts, tax revenues. Can you maybe give some examples as to some of the states that have missed, when it relates to the banking industry in the past, and how you're seeing a lot of the same similarities as to what's being built currently right now within the state of Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen so many scenarios over the last decade, and been involved, intimately involved in some of these. The state, I would say, the formation of their legislation from a banking standpoint, and their initial proposal brings me back to when the state of Utah launched. And fortunately for the state of Utah, the treasurer's office, they had a very savvy group that came from banking, and so they understood the fact that if a state has a tax, every state has a tax bank account. So that may be with a Bank of America or a Chase or an institution that's large enough to be able to take those deposits. And those tax deposits are exempt from much of the same oversight that a bank would have with a traditional account. That's why you don't see the state, let's say if Bank of America is banking the state of Washington, you don't see them drop the state tax account, because those tax revenues are under a different set of rules, essentially. However, if a state owns a dispensary and starts deriving income directly from the sale of a federally illegal product, they're in jeopardy of losing their state tax account, right? And so the state of Utah
and that's what's being proposed in Wisconsin right now, correct?
Correct, yeah. And so if they were to launch that program tomorrow and approve that, I would say there's a 90+% chance they lose their state tax account, which could put the entire state in jeopardy from a banking standpoint. So, I think this is a scenario where you've got legislators that are proposing something, but they don't necessarily understand the repercussions behind the scenes of if that actually went through. And so my hope is that the state treasurer's office there gets ahead of this.
This blows my mind away as to how this industry is developing so much, but so many people have no idea how this industry works.
So have you spoken to anybody in regards to, because it really does pose a question to me, like, why would the state want to own a cannabis dispensary? Like, it's not in the actual state and the governmental bodies in these states. They're not in the business of being in business. They're in the business of governing. Like, is this to ensure regulatory oversight, or is this because they're getting greedy and they want to have their hand in the cookie jar and they see cannabis as a lucrative enterprise?
I don't know in the case of Wisconsin. I haven't been involved in that. I was, I would say pretty involved in the Utah rollout, and that was not the case. I think in the Utah scenario, they wanted that oversight. They wanted to, use it to quote unquote set an example to the industry. But I know they quickly got away from that when they realized the repercussions they would occur if they move forward. And I think you're going to see that in Wisconsin too, in short order. That I would imagine the treasurer's office is probably already in touch with them, saying, "Hey guys, I know you think this is a good idea, but at the end of the day, it's not going to work."
Have you had conversations with different officials in different states that have gotten it wrong in the past? And if so, like what happened? Like, what were some of those conversations? What did they entail?
Well, I think the most glaring example of state governments being out of touch with reality on the banking side is the state bank proposals. And those started in the Pacific Northwest in the early days. There were states that spent, even municipalities that spent well into six figures on feasibility studies to determine, hey, could we open a state bank to bank the cannabis industry? And in every single case, it came back as a non-starter for a whole myriad of reasons. But there was one example, and I don't want to throw this particular politician under the bus, but there was a state that proposed legislation. And it was a senator that was really behind the majority of it, and the legislation was clearly not going to work from the beginning. But it kept gaining momentum, and I was at a government affairs conference in that state, gosh, probably going back 4 or 5, maybe 6 years ago, and was very critical of it because I had seen what had happened in other states. And his office called me about 3 days later, and they said, Tyler, why were you so critical? We're looking for feedback. And I said, look, instead of me, talking about all the ways this would not work, why don't you explain to me how this is going to work through your lens? And they said, well, we're going to offer cash drop facilities all over the state. And if a cannabis operator comes to house their cash at those drop facilities, they get a checkbook that they can write checks out of. And my initial comment was, well, you do understand that you'll never get access to the Fed if you propose this. And their answer was, yes, we understand that. And I said, okay, well, then talk me through if I'm a retailer and I go drop off $2 million and I want to write a check to somebody and I write that check and I deposit it at a bank, how do the funds move? And the response was, well, we're going to have drivers that drive the cash over to that bank to deposit it. And I just, I couldn't help but laugh. And I said, well, what happens when that bank receives that check and then they have cash coming in their door for a cannabis operation? What do you think they're going to say?
Right.
And the room was silent, right? I mean, it was, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, there were probably 12 people on the call. And I got a call from that group later that same week. And they said, well, we understand that this is probably not likely to work very well, but we're going to push it through anyways because this particular politician feels that it's going to be a win for themselves. And so, it's just, it's.
Are you serious?
Yeah. I mean, these are the things that have happened to this. I mean, there are countless examples of things like this. And even recently, New York has been pursuing the option of opening a state bank, which again will never work. And to boot, there are multiple institutions that are large from an asset perspective that are open for business in that state already. And that industry in New York has been banked since 2016.
Wow.
Since they launched.
Yeah.
So it's, again, just the perception of state governments as opposed to reality, especially as it comes to banking, or in many cases, there's a huge chasm.
You learn something new every day in this industry, don't you?
I mean, it's amazing. You would think that these politicians have regulatory consultants that would be like, guys, this is a very bad idea. Like, despite the political win, like the mechanics here just don't work. At the end of the day, and we're creating more liabilities than solutions. I mean, is this kind of framework and these kind of things? I mean, I'm assuming these are some of the crazier things that you've seen proposed in this sector.
I don't even know what to say.
They are, but the thing that's interesting is these things were proposed 10 years ago. I mean, and even going back to payments, I mean, I've probably seen no less than 400 payment companies come and go in this space, and they just keep trying to reformat the same thing in a different way, thinking it's going to work or chasing, and it doesn't, and it never will. And unfortunately, it's going to take federal legality for some of those things to come into the market.
So not safe banking, not rescheduling, federal legalization.
The networks are very specific about federal legalization. They do not want to participate in federally illegal industries. I believe it's against their charter in many cases. And so for them, this might as well be terrorist activity. I mean, they view it the same way because they have to.
Wow.
And I know the industry is angry about that. And I've seen a lot of people in the industry target the networks. But I will say, I think, I get the impression that they're trying to, do this as best they can within the framework that they're dealing with.
Yeah. Speaking of networks, we had your CEO Sunday on a couple of weeks ago. Great person, by the way. First time we had her on. But when we talk about networks, credit cards, where are we at with that? Like, if rescheduling is announced, are they still positioning it and looking at it as we're not getting involved until we see federal legalization?
It's still federally illegal. So here, but I do get the impression that they want to provide a solution to the industry. But they can't, right? And so maybe there's a path to victory at some point, but I really do not believe that happens without federal legality.
Well, one can only hope that day comes, but I don't think that's going to be coming anytime soon. I think the biggest question is that once rescheduling is announced, what does that look like as far as paperwork timeline wise? There's a lot of questions that people are asking and how that works out, but that's going to be years in the making too, don't you think?
I do, and it's also even from a lending standpoint. I mean, if 280E goes away, obviously the potential lending base increases dramatically, but that's going to happen over time because institutions want to see seasoning. They want to see a track record. They want to know what those cash flows look like to be able to fund loans, and so even that's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah. I do think when it comes to lending too, though, there's going to be a lot of players, like you said, in the space. And I think we're in a situation now where there's only few, and to just take on this kind of risk and to be writing checks the sizes that they are, you'll probably see, do you think a lot of players that come into the space will start working amongst each other to help offset? Go ahead.
It's already happening.
Yeah.
There are a number of institutions that syndicate. We try to work closely with other lenders in the space to try and provide the solutions that operators need. I will say this though too. I think, to go a little bit further than lending, I'm seeing a number of banks exit now. We've seen a number of institutions come into the cannabis market to bank it, and because it's gotten so highly competitive, they either can't get the account bases that they were anticipating, they can't get the revenue they're anticipating, or somebody undercuts them in the market. And so we're seeing a number of institutions. We're trying to help a number of institutions by either offloading their portfolios for them or acquiring them, and things of that nature to help help the industry, not be without a home overnight. Right.
That's interesting. Well, this has been helpful. If before I let you go, one important question: if you had to make any bold predictions here in 2024 for the industry, what would it be?
I mean, I don't know if it's bold, but I think I really believe this time. I'm getting the impression that the current administration feels like they need some really big wins.
Of course.
And I think that this rescheduling is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm not, as you know, I'm probably the last one in the industry to be overly faithful in legislation being passed in any way, shape, or form, or anything happening from a government perspective that's positive from the industry at the federal level. But I think this one is, I'm getting the feeling that this one's imminent.
How does that change your job, or I guess your day-to-day stuff? Like besides the lending, if we have rescheduling, when you talk about some of these concerns related to banking, do you think that opens up the doors and generates more conversation and most importantly, interest, or no?
I think it will help with interest again on the lending side. I think that, one thing that people aren't talking about is, and this may seem nominal, but in some cases for some of these large operators, it can be significant. They're getting interest on deposits. We're paying interest on deposits to our client base. And so if all of a sudden, you're getting 30, 40% more cash flow and you're earning interest on those deposits, or you're able to invest those, I think you're going to see revenues obviously increase because 280E goes away. Revenues increase because they're gaining interest. And then I think you're going to see a huge, I think you're going to see some pretty significant consolidation as a result as well.
Yeah. But listen, information like this helps us grow, and I appreciate the update. But more importantly, enjoy the sun. Let's keep in touch.
Yeah. Thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. Hey everyone, so what'd you think of the video? Leave your comments below and let us know your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. As usual, subscribe to our channel by clicking on the link here. If you want to see more videos like this, then click on the link here and click on that bell for all notifications. Because most importantly, we want to know your feedback because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.